Part 118. The Reborn Wife is Farming. Author, Yu Yuzu. Chapter 1173. When Mu Yangling received the manuscript, he said in amazement, "Hasn't our Times been soliciting manuscripts from outsiders all the time? Why didn't we send it to the newspaper office, and send it to the palace?" Zhu Liang coughed lightly, and said, "Madam, the manuscripts of the newspaper have always been written by the adults in the court or the gentlemen and students in the academy, because there are enough manuscripts sent by them every day, so they are not widely distributed. Hire it, otherwise, their newspaper office would not have been buried." Mu Yangling touched his nose and realized. This era is not the era when writing articles in the previous life required royalties. Scholars are looking for fame. As long as they can publish articles in the Times, they are willing to pay even if it is paid. But is Mu Yangling the kind of person who takes advantage of others? She handed the manuscript to Zhu Liang and said, "Send it to the newspaper office for them to read. If it is qualified, send it out, and call me the manager of the newspaper office. I have something to discuss with him." Now more and more people are submitting manuscripts to the newspaper, and sometimes the emperor will notify the people of the whole country through the newspaper when encountering important events. Last time during the Lantern Festival, didn't the emperor publish an article about having fun with the people in the Times? What's more, the Times originally wanted the people all over the world to understand the country's policies and popularize the laws, so as not to be fooled by local corrupt officials, so these alone took up a large page, leaving little space for others to publish. So Mu Yangling planned to open a few more newspapers. Of course not too many. Rare things are more valuable. She doesn't want newspapers to overflow to the point where the people have no choice but to add 3 or 4. One is dedicated to serving the world's students and publishing some articles or political opinions of great Confucians or ministers, as well as collected poems and essays, various historical views, etc. One is dedicated to serving women all over the world, talking about how to manage the family and raise children, how to deal with the relationship between parents-in-law and husband-wife, and then quietly promote feminism, and gradually improve the status of women. One is dedicated to serving children all over the world, and it publishes various fables and principles of life. The last one is the reproduction of the Times, which has various layouts, and then focuses on customs and wonders in various places, so that the manuscripts sent by wanderers will have a place to go. Except for the Times, which must be unified across the country, other newspapers can be run separately by state newspapers, and then combined every 6 days to select excellent publications from previous newspapers so that people across the country can read them. Mu Yangling and Guanxi Sun said, "This matter must be published in the Times in advance, and more editors must be recruited, and all submitted manuscripts must be reviewed one by one." Steward Sun's eyes sparkled. "Don't worry, ma'am, now many high-ranking scholars are willing to work in our newspaper. In some academies, students even flock here. It's not difficult to recruit editors. So you have to manage it even more. When the forest is big, there are all kinds of birds. You can discuss it with a few gentlemen and come up with an editorial code. Officials must abide by the laws of the country, students must abide by the school rules, and our editors must naturally abide by theirs. Rules. Only with constraints can this industry last for a long time." Guanxi Sun understood that their newspaper had a special status, publishing articles by literati from all over the world, and was sought after by literati, but if the newspaper didn't treat them fairly, it would surely arouse resentment from literati. Their pens are not weak, and if the newspaper loses a good reputation, then it really has nothing. Steward Sun nodded solemnly and said, "Don't worry, madam, I will start to handle this matter tomorrow, but I'm humble and low, I'm afraid I'll humiliate them if I invite a few gentlemen. Literati are arrogant. Although Guanxi Sun is in charge of the newspaper, he is still a servant. If he really wants to invite people, Not only will he not be able to invite people, but he will also offend people. Mu Yangling also thought of this, and said distressedly, should I let the prince go? Steward's son looked at the princess pitifully, and Mu Yangling sighed, then I have to go. Heiran didn't know what would happen. Mu Yangling sighed, it seems that we still need to find a museum owner. Steward's son twitched his eyebrows and opened his mouth, but he still didn't say anything against it. The newspaper office is becoming more and more important, and there are still many places to deal with literati in the future. His status is low, and the literati must not be convinced. For long-term development, it is inevitable to hire a highly respected person as the newspaper office. Mu Yangling was worried about who she could invite to be the curator. Chi Heiran couldn't see her entanglement, so he let out the news directly. The next day, Mu Yangling received a bunch of invitations for an unprecedented time. You must know that the rumors that she is not sociable are as famous as her fierce reputation, so except for the necessary birthday banquets and flower viewing banquets, few people will send her posts. She hadn't received a few invitations all year long, and she received a dozen or so at once. Not only Mu Yangling was curious, but Zhu Liang also sent the invitations in person, asking, Your Majesty, are you going? If he wanted to go, he would prepare presents earlier. His concubine didn't like to go out as guests. It would be great if he could lighten up his communication skills this time. Mu Yangling flipped through the invitations, and gradually saw the way. Among these invitations were those from the Hanlin family, those from the Kuazijian Sacrifice Restaurant, and those from various Confucian schools in Beijing, and even Fang, who had just been promoted to the crown prince. Zaiwen. Are you all interested in the position of the newspaper owner? Mu Yangling asked hesitantly. Chi Heiran took the post from her hand and flipped through it, curled his lips and said, This is too few, wait for another 2 days to see if there are any better candidates. Mu Yangling looked at him, even Taifu Fang jumped out, who else do you want to wait for? Fang Zaiwen is not suitable, Chi Heiran said, he is the prince's teacher, so he cannot manage the newspaper. Seeing that Aling was a little confused, he waved Zhu Liang back and said, You think your newspaper is just a newspaper? Now it bears the heavy responsibility of leading the public opinion in Daki. If it weren't for the private property of the palace, you have always acted fairly. Those ministers in the DPRK have already got their hands on it. Every day when the newspapers in the capital are published, all officials, academies and students will have a copy, and ordinary people who can read will be willing to spend 5 yuan to buy a copy, and all restaurants and tea houses will also buy dozens of newspapers. Copies are either read aloud or placed at the front desk for people to borrow, and all counties and towns near the capital can receive them. At least 7 out of 10 people can see the Times. Aling, the edict issued by the imperial court is nothing more than this. Mu Yangling was not a naive girl, so she quickly understood and asked, Brother Huang, don't you want to take the newspaper as your own? What's the difference between my hand and my elder brother's? But it's different when it's passed on to the children, Chi Heiran said, this thing is a big killer. It can't be handed over to the royal family alone, nor can it be completely in our hands, let alone give it to the imperial court. So people from all sides have to intervene in order to balance. Mu Yangling stared at him, why don't I know what you think? Chi Heiran coughed lightly, and made an excuse and said, isn't it necessary to adjust slowly? Anyway, it's not in a hurry. As long as I'm still alive, this newspaper will remain the same. Mu Yangling looked at him suspiciously, couldn't help pinching the soft flesh around his waist, and asked, tell the truth. Aren't I afraid that you will be angry? Chi Heiran said, the newspaper is your property, if you hand it over again, how many things do you have left? Chi Heiran didn't say anything, but he felt guilty in his heart. Aling was not very good at doing business, and produced few things, but every item was focused on the lifeline of the country, so that he always had to give up. Not only him, But also the eldest brother felt a little ashamed. How could he dare to ask Aling to give up the newspaper office again? The Reborn Wife is Farming. Author, Yu Yuzu. Chapter 1174. Mu Yangling said indifferently, I didn't point to the newspaper to make money at the beginning, as long as my brother doesn't want me to hand over the glass workshop and watch workshop to the company. It's not about money, it's about prestige. Aling, don't you know the prestige gathered by the Times? Then it doesn't matter to me, Mu Yangling said confidently, I'm the cutest person in Daki just because of the Harvest Grain Store. How can I use the newspaper to earn me some prestige? Mu Yangling thought that every time she went shopping now, someone would always kowtow to her from afar, so she sighed sadly, it's not a good thing to have too much reputation. Chi Heiran could only nod to show that she was right. So you don't mind handing over the newspaper? Chi Heiran stared at his wife and asked. Mu Yangling nodded briskly, my original intention is to let the people of the world know state affairs, not to be deceived by local officials, to promote propriety, righteousness, and shame, to let them know etiquette, right and wrong, the law, and know how to protect their own rights. So the newspaper is here. It doesn't matter who owns it, what matters is whether the newspaper can be run well. If you have a good way, I will naturally listen to you. Chi Heiran felt that Aling, who had no desires and desires, was so cute, so he hugged her and said, Aling, you are so kind. Not everyone can resist the temptation of fame and fortune. The prestige given by the Times is no less than the accumulation of a great Confucian, and Aling gave in when he said so. Chi Heiran hugged her and said, Aling, I feel much nobler when I'm with you. Mu Yangling coughed embarrassingly, and whispered, it's not that the newspaper does not make money. Newspapers really don't make money. In order to allow more people to read the newspaper, she only sells a newspaper as big as 5 cents. In addition to the cost of printing, pen, ink, and paper, there are also manuscript fees, salaries of the newspaper staff, and transportation costs for delivering the newspaper, etc. Excluding these costs, the profit of the newspaper office in the capital is less than 100 taels, not to mention some remote state capitals, where the newspaper office is almost in balance. During the Chinese New Year, as long as the money is not lost, Mu Yangling can burn a stick of incense. And in order to run the Times well, they also hold some events every year, inviting famous Confucians or ministers to attend. These costs are quite a lot, so the sum of the profits is enough to hold an event, and then send a medium-sized letter to the employee's red envelope. The Times can also bring prestige, but money cannot bring it. Unless it squeezes employees or raises prices, there are only 2 quick ways to reduce printing costs and transportation costs. That is to say, the Wang family's great business is not afraid of losing money. If another person is replaced as the boss of the newspaper, she will not have the surname Mu if the other party's hair turns gray. It doesn't make money after working so hard. Don't look at the prestige of the Times now. That's because we are the only newspaper in Daki. After a few years, there will be more people running newspapers, and the reputation of the Times will drop. Mu Yangling's ownership of the Times not persistent. If it wasn't for Chi Ziyuan's pressure, after seeing the effect of the Times, the newspapers would have sprung up like mushrooms after rain. When he first saw the power of the Times, Chi Ziyuan was afraid that someone would use the newspaper to do something wrong, so he issued an edict to order the local government to suppress it and not allow the second person to run the newspaper. This pressure has lasted for so many years, but in a few years, the country will be pacified and Anshan will be pacified, and the imperial court will come up with rules and regulations, and it will definitely decentralize power. By then, there will definitely be many people running newspapers. Even if the Times is still the leader, its authority will be divided a lot. Mu Yangling shared these analyses with Chi Heiran, and concluded, so running a newspaper is tiring, and it doesn't make money. If it wasn't for the benefit of the people, I really wouldn't do this thankless thing. I can give up the ownership. Not bad. Chi Heiran immediately went to the palace to find Chi Ziyuan, proudly but happily told him that he could consider taking over the newspaper. Chi Ziyuan took Li Jinghua's hand and sighed, I really don't know what Aling thinks, she always seems to care about something different from ours. Li Jinghua said with a smile, if you want me to say that she is of high quality, she should be replaced by someone who is more selfish. You can let her go, even if it is not profitable, you can hold it in your hand and let it go to others. The two people in the palace were not at peace, and the outside world was also exploded because of a statement in the Times. This statement was written by Mu Yangling himself. The writing is average, but everyone can understand it. Mu Yangling first talked about her original intention of running a newspaper, and then looked forward to the future, and announced that she would open 4 more newspapers, and then told everyone that in addition to the newspaper's regular recruiters, the general public is also welcome. The masses contribute manuscripts, and all manuscripts that pass the review can get a certain amount of manuscript fees after they are published. The contributors are regardless of age, gender, and class. In the last 2 paragraphs of the letter, Mu Yangling emphasized Wengzhou newspaper, a special newspaper for women. She is a woman, and has always felt the difficulties of women. She hopes to help more women live a better life through Wengzhou News. She hopes that one day women will become strong, confident, capable, and upright, and there are also reasons based on this when she started the newspaper. At the back of the statement is the address of the submission, all of which are the locations of newspapers in various places. Once this statement was published, it caused huge waves. Some people pay attention and can contribute to the newspaper, which means that they have the possibility of becoming famous. Some people pay attention to the extra newspapers, and they are already looking forward to these newspapers. Some people pay attention to what Princess Rong said about women, and feel that this princess treats women too much, but she is a woman herself, which is understandable. At this time, the women in the back house were also reading this statement. At this moment, no matter how they felt about Mu Yangling, they couldn't help admiring her. Because no one has ever done a big thing for a woman, and Mu Yangling was the first. Even Li Jinghua held the newspaper and wiped away tears, Aling is fine, I am proud to be at the same age as her. After being moved, Li Jinghua's heart moved, and she asked Wen Kui, how about I write the first article for Wengzhou Daily? At the same time, many girls and daughters-in-law in the back house are asking the people close to them, can I contribute to Wengzhou News? Even the old lady, who was over 60 years old, held the newspaper and asked the old woman next to her, you said that if I contribute to Wengzhou News, will Princess Rong accept it? The old mother looked at the old lady who was trying to lower her voice, and said with black lines all over her head, why don't you try? Then go get a brush and ink, the old lady hurriedly called to the old mother, and whispered, bring it quietly, don't let others know, don't those literati and refined scholars have a good name? I'll take one too. That way no one would know it was her. The old mama had black lines all over her head, but she still quietly came over with a pen, ink, paper, and inkstone. At the same time, there are obviously many people who have the same idea as the old lady, because it was only 3 days after the statement was published that Mu Yangling received a large stack of female submissions. You are listening to Novels at Bless Up channel. Wish you happiness and luck. Please subscribe to receive new novels. How do you feel about this novel? Please like and leave a comment. The Reborn Wife is Farming. Author, Yu Yuzu. Chapter 1175. Holding a stack of manuscripts, Mu Yangling slapped the table and said, I don't care about other newspapers. Anyway, Wengzhou Daily must be launched as soon as possible. Zhu Liang lowered his head and said, Madam, this Wengzhou newspaper is independent from the newspaper office. After all, most of the content on it is written by women, so it's not easy to ask some men to review it. You can find it in the capital. It's really hard for people working in newspapers. Most of the women who are willing to come out to work are from poor families. Most of these women have little knowledge. How can they review manuscripts? There are quite a few talented women in Beijing, but how could they be willing to work? Mu Yangling rolled his eyes and was about to speak, when Xiaofu led the little leopard and Beizu and came running, yelling. Mu Yangling immediately shut his mouth. The newspaper is important, but children are also important. He waved Zhu Liang to step back, caught the rushing Xiaofu, pushed him aside, and immediately caught the little leopard who rushed over like a cannonball. She tapped the little leopard on the forehead and said, "How many times have I told you, don't run so fast, what if you bump into the person in front?" The little leopard covered his forehead and shouted, "It's so big, it hurts so much." "Nonsense, mother didn't even use much strength," Mu Yangling scolded him with a straight face. "It's true, touch it if you don't believe me." As he spoke, he pulled his mother's hand and touched his head. The little leopard had just shaved his head before the Chinese New Year. At this time, the hair on his head was only half a finger long. Mu Yangling touched a small bag at once, and was surprised. "How is this possible? I obviously didn't use much force." The little leopard looked at his mother aggrieved. Beizu was covering her mouth and giggling, while Xiaofu shouted anxiously, "It wasn't my aunt who knocked it, it was smashed, and I was smashed out of my bag too, look, look." As he spoke, he lowered his head and asked her to touch the back of his head. Mu Yangling went to touch it, and sure enough, there was a small bag. Mu Yangling looked at them suspiciously, and asked, "Did you hit each other?" She didn't believe that someone rushed to smash a few children in the palace. The two children shook their heads again and said aggrievedly, "We are good, but we are obedient, and we are not naughty at all." Beizu testified for them, "Didn't they smash it?" "Who smashed that?" The three children shook their heads together. Beizu said, "I didn't see it." The little leopard said, "It's a hidden weapon. It flew over from the wall and hit us right away." Xiaofu was older, articulate, and said clearly, "It flew in from the outside. My brothers and sisters and I were planting flowers under the fence to play, and the hidden weapon flew in with a whistling sound." "Where's the hidden weapon?" Xiao Fu and Xiao Beizai took out two brocade bags from the small bag they were carrying. Mu Yangling took the brocade bag with a strange expression, and asked, "Is this a hidden weapon?" The three children nodded with absolute certainty. Mu Yangling opened the brocade bag and took a look. Inside were several manuscripts and a stone, both of which were the same. Mu Yangling is a little speechless, so the submission method has developed from door delivery to wall delivery. Xiao Fu rubbed his head and looked at Fourth Ant aggrievedly, and shouted, "Fourth Ant, help us catch the assassins, don't let them harm others again." Mu Yangling couldn't help but tap his forehead, and said, "It's not that serious, so don't yell." "But we really hurt." The little leopard nodded tearfully, and looked at his mother with the same grievance. Although Beizu was not hit by the smash, she empathized with her and looked at her mother as well. Mu Yangling got up and said, "Let's go, take me to see where you were smashed." The three children immediately led the way in front of them. The three children have recently become obsessed with planting flowers and grass. The short-term ideal is to plant flowers and plants in every inch of the land of Prince Rong's mansion and Anjun Prince's mansion, so that their footprints can be found everywhere. The flower beds in the garden are precious flowers and plants left by the former Qin Xiangfu. Although Mu Yangling doesn't know the goods, he also knows that they are precious, so they are not allowed to destroy them. The three children can only focus on the corners. Recently, they have planted the foot of the rockery and the lakeside with flowers and plants, so they had to expand the footprint to the bottom of the wall. Early this morning, the three children carried their small bags, which were filled with flowers, grass seeds, and various snacks, and each of them ran to the base of the fence with a small medicine pick. They chased butterflies, caught a few dragonflies, spoiled several flowers, and ate some snacks. Then they took out their small medicine picks to work, but they only hoed for less than half an hour. The brocade bag wrapped with stones flew in from outside the wall with a whistling sound and hit Ziofu on the back of the head. Ziofu immediately jumped up and shouted, "There are enemies." Beza rolled on the spot as his mother taught him, but he didn't control his body well, and rolled a long way away. The little leopard had a bad memory and didn't remember what his mother taught him. At that moment, a brocade bag hit him on the head. One hit the back of the head, and the other hit the upper part of the forehead. The two cousins stood together, exactly symmetrical. Mu Yangling followed them to see the situation under the fence, and traces of their labor could still be seen on the ground. Mu Yangling looked at the hole they dug, and asked, "Are you sure this kind of plant can really grow things?" The three children nodded together. "We asked the gardener, and he said that this way of planting is fine." Mu Yangling asked Lishun and the others to patrol along the wall, while he stood in front of the pit and discussed with the children, "That's because the gardener gave you chrysanthemum seeds and morning glory seeds, which are the easiest to survive. In fact, Mother prefers roses. Why don't you try all kinds of things like this?" "Rose has thorns," Beza said hesitantly. "That's good, it can also prevent thieves?" The girls twitched their mouths. What kind of thieves dare to come to the prince's mansion to act wildly, and would the thieves who dare to come be afraid of the thorns of roses? Mostly to guard against the young masters, right? The little leopard was immediately moved. "Then let's plant roses." After a few people finished speaking, the inspectors on both sides came back. Everyone had bags in their hands. Even Mu Yangling had expected that, seeing so many bags, he couldn't help but open his mouth wide. Li Chun said helplessly, "Just now we threw a brocade bag in the past, ma'am. How did people outside know that we would find these bags? If the young masters don't come here to plant flowers, wouldn't their efforts be in vain?" Mu Yangling held the bag and said, "I'm afraid they are holding on to the hope that if they are discovered, they are pitiful, but it is not worth advocating at all. What if something happens to someone? You must know that they put stones in the bag in order to be able to throw it in. What if someone puts a larger stone and accidentally hits the vitals of the person inside?" Mu Yangling touched the small bags on Ziofu and Ziobeazai's heads, put down the bags, and said, "Get a wooden box outside the wall, and leave a hole for them to submit their articles. If someone throws a bag into it, don't show it to me, directly treat it as garbage." The Reborn Wife is Farming. Author, Yu Yuzu. Chapter 1176. Xiaofu rolled his eyes, raised his head and shouted, "Fourth aunt, leave this matter to us." Mu Yangling looked at the three children who were afraid that the world would not be chaotic, thought of their grievances, and agreed. After they left, Mu Yangling said to Lishun, "Go and watch them yourself, as long as they don't destroy people's manuscripts, don't worry about it. If these boys don't find their place back, they're afraid they'll make trouble at the home of the owners of these manuscripts." Mu Yangling didn't want Wengzhou News to cause such disturbances before it was launched. Mu Yangling thought that putting up a sign outside the palace would solve the problem, but it was impossible. In just 3 days, the concierge of the palace not only received countless manuscripts, but also received invitations. There was a threat of burning the manuscript if it was thrown in, but no one dared to throw it in, but they began to ask the servants of the palace to pass it on for them. Because they felt that so many people contributed, and the princess didn't know when she would be able to see it in the concierge or in the wooden box, of course they had to find another way. If it is said that most of the submitted manuscripts came to the Wengzhou newspaper, then there were invitation cards and greeting cards for both men and women. Because the owner of the newspaper has not yet been determined, many people are interested, and for the family's weight, at first they posted a post to invite Mu Yangling or those people's daughter-in-law or wife, but later saw that Mu Yangling refused. They could only use the old lady in the family. Posted a post in the name of Mu Yangling. Seeing that Mu Yangling still couldn't come, she could only invite them in her own name, and in order to increase their bargaining chips, they would add some prefixes to their names. For example, Fang Ziwen, the Crown Prince, Lin White of Songshan Academy, Fan Yang, and Lu Liang. The former uses his official position to show his identity. Lin White himself is a great Confucian, a doctor of Songshan Academy, very prestigious among the scholars in the south of the Yangtze River, and shows himself with fame. Family. These men came for the owner of the newspaper, while the invitations for the ladies and wives of the other big base were for the Wengzhou newspaper. Of course, they didn't want to work in the Wengzhou newspaper, but just wanted to ask if and when their contributions could be published in the Wengzhou newspaper. Unfortunately, Lin White's mother, Mrs. Lin, also sent invitations to Mu Yangling. She can ignore other people's posts, but Mrs. Lin's cannot. The Lin family is not an aristocratic family, but it is also a scholarly family. His father was once the Minister of Rights of the former court, and he resigned after fleeing to the south with the court. Taifu. Lin White was the #1 scholar in Jinjian's 12th year, even stronger than Yan Du of the same discipline, and Yan Du was just a biography. But unlike Yan Du, he fulfilled his father's expectations after winning the first prize. He studied all the way and took apprentices all the way. Jingyan returned to the capital in 25 years to teach at Songshan Academy. It can be said that he is full of peaches and plums, so he has a great reputation among scholars in the south of the Yangtze River, far ahead of Yan Du in the same period. Above Lu Liang and others. In the third year of Taikang, Qi Ziyuan personally went to Songshan Academy to invite him to be an official, but he didn't agree, and he still didn't agree to the third invitation, so he just closed the door and disappeared after the third invitation. Mu Yangling didn't know if Qi Ziyuan was annoyed, but Qi Heiran was annoyed, and after this incident, Lin White's reputation was even greater. There is no way, although most of the world is ordinary people, everyone has the desire to become an official, but they all yearn for excellence and respect those who can withstand the temptation of fame and fortune. And during the Chinese New Year that year, Qi Ziyuan simply named his mother Mrs. Lin as Mrs. Yupin, saying that she taught children well, so Mrs. Lin also had a grand reputation in the south of the Yangtze River. She had already sent an invitation to Mu Yangling for her son before, and Mu Yangling should not, but if she did not do it again this time, she would take Zhou, even if she was Princess wrong, she might suffer people criticize, the mouths of those scholars in Jilin are not for display. So others can refuse, but Mrs. Lin's invitation must be accepted. Mu Yangling simply asks Xiao Xia to accompany her. Xiao Xia has also been very distressed these few days. You are the one who created this Wengzhou newspaper. The posts I sent to my house these days are all piled up on the table. Everyone in the capital knows that Prince Rong's mansion is not good at socializing, but they are best friends with Xiao Xia and the Queen. The Queen has a high status and lives in a secluded palace. They have nothing to do, but Xiao Xia is gentle and amiable. Those who are friendly will come to ask Xiao Xia to say good things for her. Let's talk about feelings. Mu Yangling is used to pretending to be deep, closing the door, only she knows whether the post has been answered or not, but Xiao Xia's image outside has always been gentle and amiable. There are acquaintances here, how can she keep rejecting it? Therefore, she is busier than Mu Yangling during this time, and therefore she hopes that the matter of Wengzhou news will be finalized sooner than Mu Yangling. As long as the regulations are set, she will be able to relax. Mu Yangling pulled her and said, accompany me to meet Mrs. Lin, and then help me find a good day. We invite all the ladies and ladies in Beijing to sit down. Wengzhou News wants to recruit people. This person you have to choose among them. How is this possible? Xiao Xia was astonished. Who would go to work for a newspaper? Aling, it's offending people to say that. It's not like the family can't get rid of the pot. Who would rush to work in a newspaper? Writing 1 or 2 poems and publishing 1 or 2 articles is justifiable, but going out to work is a bad thing. Even Xiao Xia thinks so, let alone other people. Mu Yangling suddenly felt that he had a long way to go. Then we can't ask a group of stinky men to review our manuscripts. They know what women think, how to care for their husbands and children, and the difficulties of getting along with mother-in-law and daughter-in-law. Mu Yangling sighed, but if you need money, you have to come out to do it. Living women are not capable enough to review these manuscripts. In fact, I think there is nothing wrong with working in a newspaper office. I only work half a day, and I can take turns, and everyone has something to do. Didn't you just complain that you only look after the children all day long? Just looking after the kids, nothing to do. Mu Yangling continued, other newspapers are still under the Times newspaper, but Wengzhou News is going to be independent. I have already planned that Wengzhou News will have women from the owner to the printing staff. Consider the female news agents first, we also do something for the women of the world. Xiao Xia opened her mouth wide and asked, then, who will be the owner of the pavilion? Are you in charge? Mu Yangling shook his head, the queen will be the first curator. I decided to go to the palace in the afternoon and ask her. It's best if she is willing. If she doesn't, I'll ask Mrs. Lin to be her. Anyway, they are all honorary, and the two deputy curators are the ones who are really in charge. Xiao Xia was startled, her eyes lit up and said, if you can invite Empress or Mrs. Lin, most likely you will be able to invite them to work in Wengzhou News. The Reborn Wife is Farming. Author, Yu Yuzu. Chapter 1177. Li Jinghua's eyes widened, I'm going to be the owner. She only thought about writing an article for the Wengzhou newspaper, but she never thought about being the owner of the newspaper. Besides, there was no precedent for the queen to be the owner of the newspaper. Seeing that most of her disapproved, Mu Yangling took her by the hand and persuaded, I don't like that you follow precedents in everything you do. How can there be so many precedents in this world? Besides, everything remains the same, so what's the matter these days, maybe the better it is. You are the queen, the most honorable woman in the world, so should you, the most honorable woman, do something for the women in the world. Li Jinghua laughed, what do you want me to do for women in the world? Mu Yangling turned to look at the maids in her palace and stopped talking. Li Jinghua raised her eyebrows, this was the first time in her palace. Li Jinghua waved people to step back and look at her. Mu Yangling glanced at Wen Kui. Wen Kui smiled and went out to guard the gate of the palace. Mu Yangling took Li Jinghua's hand and said solemnly, strive for more rights and interests for women in the world, so that their status will be higher. If equality between men and women is realized one day, then you, the queen, must be the first, the one who was mentioned. Li Jinghua was so frightened that her heart almost jumped out, and she nodded her forehead dumbfounded for a while and said, you scared me again, and you started talking nonsense about equality between men and women. Mu Yangling looked at her seriously, Li Jinghua's smiling face gradually disappeared, and asked, who else have you told such nonsense? Does what you said to Heiran count? Li Jinghua breathed a sigh of relief, patted her chest and said, I don't dare to say such things outside in the future, let those stubborn old scholars hear and see how they arrange you. Mu Yangling snorted softly, and said, Wu Zetian has been a queen. In the era of sages, there were many wives who were in charge of the house. Why can't I expect equality between men and women? Mu Yangling was angry, women are getting more and more important now. The lower is just that those old scholars have repeatedly restrained women through the words of the sages, 3 obedience and 4 virtues, it sounds nice, the 3 obedience and 4 virtues of the sages did not have so many rules. Li Jinghua didn't expect Mu Yangling to be so sharp, so he couldn't help persuading him, Aling, this situation didn't happen overnight, it is really difficult for us to change, if one is bad, there may be she was smashed to pieces, look at Emperor Wu, she is still the emperor, but in the end she couldn't do anything, and the ministers kept forcing her to abdicate and make way for the virtuous. I didn't expect it to be effective immediately, Mu Yangling said, and I'm not going to be emperor. Why are they opposing me? But it seems unethical to them that you bring up equality between men and women. Who said I proposed equality between men and women? Mu Yangling winked at her slyly. I just asked you to be the owner of my Wengzhou newspaper, so as to invite a few talented wives to work in the newspaper. Li Jinghua was helpless. If I become the hostess, the status of a woman will rise to the level of a man. Of course not, but we have made a good start. Mu Yangling knew that although Li Jinghua came from a family, she had a strong ambition, otherwise the sisters-in-law would not have become good friends, so in front of her, Mu Yangling, although he is not as unscrupulous as Qi Heiran, but he is free from many restraints. Did you know that in ancient times, children followed their mother's surname, and women's status was far superior to men's? Li Jinghua stared. Where did you know that? There is no such thing in the existing history books. Mu Yangling can't be said to be the conclusion drawn by archaeologists of later generations. She can only give the first basis. Look at the story and you will know that human beings are created by Nuwa. She is a woman, and saints have no fathers, only the mother, so it can be seen that it was a group marriage at that time, and the children followed the mother's surname and life, so it can be seen that women were very respected and had a high status at that time. Li Jinghua has a headache. Now she finally understands why the prince always asks some inexplicable questions with history books and story books. The key is why she can't help but believe what she said. So, even in ancient times, women's status is respected. It has long since passed, and now it is men's respect. Then do you know why the man's status finally replaced the woman's respect? Mu Yangling continued the previous question. Li Jinghua could only ask helplessly, why? Because of the war, Mu Yangling said solemnly, because men have more advantages than women in wars, so after wars, women will gradually lose their advantages and status, and instead become things to be scrambled for. Will fall. Li Jinghua looked at her puzzled, not understanding what this had to do with the owner of the newspaper. We can prescribe the right medicine only if we understand the reasons of superiority and inferiority, Mu Yangling said. The status of women is lower than that of men now, not only because of inherent ideas, but also because women are weaker than men. All women's money comes from men. When you are not married, you use your father's and brother's money, and after you get married, you use your husband's money. Without an economic foundation, how can you have the confidence to promote women's rights? I run Wengzhou News. One is to let women have a place to express their opinions, so that the world can see what women say. The other is to let women go out of the house to work. Mu Yangling said, maybe we people don't care about that share. Wages, but a Wengzhou newspaper can support thousands of female employees, allowing them to gradually have the right to speak at home, and even control the initiative of a family. Mu Yangling never thought of directly proposing equality between men and women, or proposing that women be officials. In her opinion, that would be tantamount to courting death. Except for Qi Heiran, Mu Yangling has always tried to figure out the men of this era with the most sinister heart. Mu Yangling's plan is very simple: let them be able to support themselves, even if they leave their father, brother, and family, they can live a good life. They can earn a fortune in the family, and we will consciously guide them. The place will definitely rise, the family status will rise, and the social status will naturally rise. Mu Yangling smiled. Then came the revision of the law. Take it slowly. We will not make major revisions, but only small corrections. For example, women who have passed the age of marriage and do not marry do not need to pay money, but those who exceed a certain age will not be required to pay. After the age, as long as the individual is willing, he can establish a female household. The son-in-law can also become an official after passing the imperial examination. If a man beats his wife and commits a crime, the woman can propose a divorce. Li Jinghua was dumbfounded, and then her expression gradually became serious. She thought this was just Mu Yangling's passion, but now it seems that she has thought it through. Li Jinghua began to think about the feasibility of this matter. We have two approaches. After 20, 50, or 100 years, women will have an irreplaceable position in society. At this time, even if their position has not been clearly raised to that of men in the law, their position will not be changed. Weak, the rest can be accomplished without us doing it. You are listening to Novels at Bless Up channel. Wish you happiness and luck. Please subscribe to receive new novels. How do you feel about this novel? Please like and leave a comment. The Reborn Wife is Farming. Author, Yu Yuzu. Chapter 1178. Li Jinghua suddenly remembered the school that Xiao Bao and Xiao Xiang had been running, and she couldn't help but covered her heart and asked, Bao Xiang school also accepts female students, you didn't think about it 10 years ago, did you? Mu Yangling shook his head, how could I have thought it through so hard? At that time, I just felt that those little girls were pitiful. If they could read some words and know how to count, life should be easier in the future. That's why I suggested that Xiao Bao and Xiao Xiang accept female students when they run the school. Li Jinghua breathed a sigh of relief. Aling was still the Aling she knew. I have this idea from the start of running a women's school. Mu Yangling glanced at Li Jinghua carefully, and said with a guilty conscience, I have been supporting the establishment of more women's schools these years, and I have tried to find ways to help the poor girls who graduated from the women's school looking for a job is to lay a good foundation. The workshops and grain shops in the palace, as long as there are suitable jobs for women, I will give them priority. Li Jinghua saw that she had paid so much for this illusory matter and persisted for so many years, she couldn't help sighing, and asked, does fourth uncle know about this? Mu Yangling chuckled, of course Ji Heiran knew, after all, Fan Zijin had to do the work for him. Seeing her expression, Li Jinghua twitched her eyebrows and asked, does that Zijin know? Mu Yangling shook his head immediately, he doesn't know. If he knows that he can't turn the world upside down, then he is a male chauvinist. He has a lot of opinions on her dominating Ji Heiran. It is recommended that all the female workers in the past be driven out. Li Jinghua doubted Ji Heiran's ability to keep secrets, can fourth uncle hide it from him? Sure. Mu Yangling patted his chest and said, if he wants to hide something from others, no one can pry his mouth open. Li Jinghua said anxiously, then I won't tell the emperor about this, you and your wife have to keep it a secret. Mu Yangling nodded fiercely, hugged Li Jinghua's arm and said, sister-in-law, I knew you were the best, so what about the owner of Wangzhou News? Li Jinghua had no choice but to say, you have already said so much, how can I refuse? Mu Yangling was so happy that he almost jumped up from the ground. Seeing that she looked like a child, Li Jinghua became more and more helpless, but cautiously warned, don't reveal this matter again, if the adults in the previous court know, neither of us can afford to go around, you know the harem is not allowed to interfere in politics. Li Jinghua rambled on, feeling very worried in her heart. There was no way to improve the status of women. I am afraid that the first thing the man in front thought of was the harem meddling in politics, and the second thought was the example of Emperor Wu, regardless of whether it was the former or the latter. All of them will be shot to death. The sister-in-law and sister-in-law decided on a plan, and even Xiao Xia didn't tell about it. Only Ji Heiran was lucky enough to know about it from Mu Yangling. Mu Yangling leaned on him and threatened, you must not tell the eldest brother about this matter, do you understand? We must hide it from them like Zijin. Ji Heiran wept bitterly, then why did you tell me? Can't you keep it from me? He really didn't want to know the secret. No, I'm still pointing at you to give me judgment and advice. How can I hide it from you? Honestly speaking, the emperor's sister-in-law promised me to be the owner of Wangzhou News, so did she agree with my long-term goal? Ji Heiran shook his head, I think my sister-in-law reluctantly agreed because she was afraid that you would hurt yourself by yelling loudly. Aling, you should stop thinking about equality between men and women. You are responsible for things here. Since the beginning of history, it has always been men are superior to women. Even when Wu Zhao was the emperor, how can it be so easy for men and women to be equal? Mu Yangling glanced at him and said nothing. At least it existed in her previous life, even in some places and fields, although gender equality is still not achieved, men and women are equal under the law and the general environment. Mu Yangling doesn't expect Daki to reach that height soon, because that means change, and change means bloodshed and sacrifice. What she wants is a subtle influence. It's too hard for a woman in this era. It's okay if she doesn't have the ability. The key is that she has the ability, time, money, and power. What's wrong with doing something for women? Mu Yangling said to Qi Heiran, if you don't let me do it, then I'll be bored. When I'm bored, I like to toss people around. Hutu and the little lion now have to go to school every day, and Ziofa takes the little leopard orb and disappears every day. Mu Yangling looked at Qi Heiran faintly. Qi Heiran immediately changed his words, I think your goal is good. If you need anything, tell me. Do you want me to talk to Zijin and ask him to recruit more female workers? Mu Yangling snorted and said, I don't need it for now, I'll tell you when I need it. Qi Heiran breathed a sigh of relief, feeling that Aling is really too dangerous now. Mu Yangling invited the queen to be the owner of the pavilion, and he was confident enough to straighten his back. She bought the newspaper next door to the Times newspaper as a base for the Wengzhou newspaper, and then spread invitations, inviting everyone to the palace as guests. Mu Yangling also had to choose 2 deputy curators and several editors from among these noble ladies. Without exception, these people must be talented women, and then their character were considered. Mu Yangling doesn't know much about the noble ladies in Beijing, but the Xiao family does, so Mu Yangling made a list based on her comments, and after the investigation, he can visit the thatched cottage. Seeing the list she made, Xiao asked in amazement, aren't you going to be the deputy head of the newspaper? Then how are you going to manage the newspaper? I'm the boss. Xiao laughed, nodded her forehead and said, You said you are smart but now you are stupid. Their status is not as good as yours. What about the Empress? She is the owner of the restaurant, but you are the boss. Then doesn't it mean that you are older than the queen? Mu Yangling really didn't pay attention to this point, she corrected immediately, you are right, then I will be the deputy curator, and then I need another person. This person must be well-rounded and have ideas, good character, and the atmosphere is not pedantic. She is not good at management, so she must choose someone who is good at management. And the Wengzhou newspaper has just been launched, and she must be in charge, so she cannot be absent as the deputy curator for the time being. The owner of the museum is elected once every 3 years, and can be re-elected, but no more than 3 terms. This means that the maximum number of years a person can serve is 9 years, which can prevent monopoly. Mu Yangling added the rules and regulations, looked at Xiao anxiously, and asked, who do you think is the right deputy curator? Xiao really wanted to do it by herself, but she knew that she was more than gentle and not domineering enough, so she definitely couldn't control those people, so she could only hold the list and think hard. You can think about Mrs. Hua, she is a general of the Imperial Guard Hua Yuanzi. His wife, from the Lu family in Shanyan, was a well-known talented woman before she got married. She is dignified, assertive, and very capable. Mrs. Lin is also good. She is Lin Wide's wife. She is talented, and she is not arrogant about her talent. The big girls and the young wives love to ask her for advice. The reborn wife is farming. Author, Yu Yuzu. Chapter 1179. The large garden of Prince Rong's mansion was open to outsiders for the first time after it was closed for renovation. The corrupt official Qin's reputation is not in vain. There are countless strange stones and flowers in the garden. Today's imperial palace may not have this scale. Even Mrs. Lin, just like Qing, couldn't help losing her mind when she saw the rare peonies planted in the garden. She supported her mother-in-law, Mrs. Lin's arm and sighed, "Princess Rong is really an elegant person, and the rumors are really misleading. If it weren't for elegant people, how could it be possible to support these delicate peonies and orchids?" Xiao Xia, who happened to hear this, was embarrassed. No one present knew the truth better than her. When De Qi took over the mess of Dezhou, the emperor was so poor that he didn't even have the money to repair the mansion for his younger brother. So when looking for the dirty silver treasures buried by Prime Minister Qin, Qi Ziyuan was very stingy and asked people to put away the precious things in Prime Minister Qin's mansion first. The strange rocks and weeds in the garden were naturally included. Although the emperor was born as a general, he also came from a family of officials. Before the soldiers rushed into the Qin Xiongfu and dug 3 feet like wolves like tigers, Fan Zhaijin asked someone to search a large courtyard, and then moved all the precious items that could be moved there, so when digging 3 feet, although the big garden suffered a devastating blow, the loss was actually not that great. Afterwards, the stolen money was not found, but many people expressed interest in the strange stones and weeds left by Qin Xiongfu. However, the stingy emperor has Fan Zhaijin in charge, who can take things from here. In the end, Qi Ziyuan waved his hand. Since he gave this mansion to his younger brother, all of this naturally belonged to his younger brother. However, Qi Heiran and Mu Yangling are both rough people. He is more interested in BMW swords than flowers and strange rocks. Mu Yangling likes flowers and plants very much, but her appreciation is only superficial. For example, the flowers are beautiful and fragrant. She has yet to discover something deeper. Fan Zhaijin thought they were reckless, so he took the initiative to select gardeners to come and grow them. When Mu Yangling and the others came back from a trip to Lingnan, the mansion was repaired, and the garden was full of vitality. After visiting Guangzhou again, several of the cherished flowers had been separated. They were sent to Fan Zhaijin's house, and the gardener even planted several new varieties, all of which entered Fan Zhaijin's mansion without exception. Earlier, Fan Zhaijin had told Qi Heiran and Mu Yangling that after his county mansion was completed, all the flowers in the garden would come from him. Qi Heiran agreed without even thinking about it. "Isn't it just a few flowers, as many as he wants, and he has no objection to moving them all away, as long as the brother is happy." Mu Yangling nodded in agreement. "Those flowers and plants are too delicate. Last time she accidentally stepped on a flower in order to catch the tiger's head, the gardener immediately fainted from crying, and even Fan Zhaijin left his official duties. She scolded her at the mansion, and she didn't mind sending them away. In fact, she thinks that non-cherishing species are pretty good. The rare flowers and plants in the garden can grow so well. Most of it depends on the hard work of the gardener, and the other half is Fan Zhaijin's concern." Xiao Xia, who knows the inside story, feels that this topic should not be allowed to continue, otherwise Mrs. Lin asks suddenly on a whim. Aling's experience in raising flowers and so on, the image that Aling had erected in the hearts of several people was completely destroyed. Xiao Xia cut off their conversation and said with a smile, "The concubine is already waiting in front, let's go and see you." Mu Yangling is considered young among the noble ladies, but she has a high position, so even Mrs. Lin has to greet her. Mrs. Lin smiled and said, "Aren't you also the princess? This is to remind us not to forget to salute you. Come on, sit up and sit down for a while, we will salute the princess of the county." Xiao Xia blushed, and said coquettishly, "Mrs. Lin likes to make fun of me." Several people went to see Mu Yangling, talking and laughing. Wearing homely clothes, Mu Yangling supported Mrs. Lin when she bowed down, took her hand and said with a smile, "Excuse me, isn't this breaking me?" Supporting Mrs. Lin, Mu Yangling said to the wives and girls who were kneeling in a circle, "Get up, I don't have so many rules here, everyone, please sit down." Seeing Mu Yangling's kindness, everyone's expressions lightened. The banquet was held in the big garden, and the seats were also in the open air. At this time, the spring was bright and the flowers were in full bloom, and the colorful colors were so beautiful. The seats were arranged in 2 rows facing each other, and behind each person were flowers of various colors, which looked beautiful and delicate without decoration, so Mu Yangling's banquet this time was simple and cost-effective. Mu Yangling sat down in the first seat, and apologized to Mrs. Lin. I received your invitation, and I wanted to visit in person, but it was at a critical time for Wengzhou News to raise funds, so I had no choice but to decline. There are many, I can't visit them one by one, so I can only post a post to invite everyone to come. First, when the spring is in full bloom, 100 flowers bloom together, so that everyone can enjoy the flowers and view. Second, if you have any questions, you can ask them together. Let's answer together. Mrs. Lin raised her eyebrows slightly. She had heard that Princess Rong had a straightforward temper, which was comparable to Prince Rong's personality. She did not expect this rumor to be true. Everyone didn't expect Princess Rong to be so direct, and they all looked at the audience. It is said that they were invited to eat, drink, enjoy the flowers, and then let the little girls show their talents. When the matter reached a climax, they brought up the Wengzhou newspaper. Mrs. Lin was also just slightly stunned, and she smiled at Mu Yangling and said, "Since your Majesty is entertaining guests at this time, the rules of the Wengzhou newspaper must have been set. Since your Majesty said that this is our women's newspaper, then I don't know if we have a chance to be in Wengzhou newspaper, a list of newspapers before publication." Mu Yangling smiled and said, "Of course, I have set some rules, but I am still young, and I always have a lot of worries, so I ask my wives to give you some pointers." Mu Yangling turned to Li Shun and nodded. Li Shun immediately distributed the printed personnel structure chart and rules and regulations of Wengzhou newspaper. The personnel structure chart only had job titles, but it was enough for everyone to understand the operation method of Wengzhou newspaper. Everyone couldn't help but be surprised. They didn't expect that Princess Rong would be so generous. She wouldn't be afraid of being copied if she took this thing out. We must know that the DPRK and China have begun to relax the non-government newspapers, and it is estimated that non-governmental newspapers will be able to run newspapers in the near future. Wouldn't this mode of operation be spread out so that people could take advantage of it? Mu Yangling didn't care about their strange eyes at all, and continued to tell Mrs. Lin, "Wengzhou News is indeed a newspaper for women all over the world, and therefore, I hope women all over the world can support this newspaper." Mrs. Lin nodded slightly. As long as it is really for the sake of the women in the world, they will naturally support it. Mrs. Lin's words were very artistic. Although she didn't evade, she didn't agree, but Mu Yangling liked it. The Reborn Wife is Farming. Author, Yu Yuzu. Chapter 1180. I have invited the Empress to be the owner of the Wengzhou newspaper. Since you have read the Wengzhou newspaper personnel structure chart, you should know that Wengzhou newspaper still lacks many people. Now Wengzhou newspaper is still in the preparation stage and urgently needs your help. Mu Yangling smiled and said, "If anyone is interested in editing Wengzhou News, please contact me. Wengzhou News welcomes you to join." Everyone was shocked, and couldn't help asking, "Is this editor going to recruit from among us?" Mu Yangling nodded, then shook his head again, and said, "When an editor wants to review a manuscript, the most important thing is talent. I don't limit my status. As long as the other party has this talent, good character, and is suitable for the position of editor, I will accept it." Everyone knows that in an era when people in the world are generally illiterate, fewer women are literate, and those who are talented enough to review poems and articles are even rarer. If there are, most of them come from their class. So if Mu Yangling wants to recruit editors, he really has to choose from among them, otherwise the other party will probably come from the family of officials and scholars. Those who were self-reliant on their talents could not help but look up proudly, while those who were illiterate could not help feeling sad. It was not because all the women from official families were illiterate. Some families only required their women to be housekeepers, and did not support them to be able to read and write. Some people also noticed that Mu Yangling was referring to the editor, but there were 2 deputy curators, 1 editor-in-chief, and 2 deputy editors listed on the paper. Could it be that these people, Mu Yangling, were also selected? If you are interested in it, make up your mind to find a way to stay and inquire about it. Mu Yangling didn't say whether there were any candidates for the deputy curator, but only talked about the content and layout requirements of Wengzhou News. Since it is to awaken women's rights, it is naturally impossible to just publish some poems and songs in newspapers or enjoy flowers and scenery. Mu Yangling told everyone that the Wengzhou newspaper can publish all kinds of knowledge, the way of housekeeping, the way of getting along with mother-in-law and daughter-in-law, philosophy of life, and even national political affairs can be published on it. Of course, if there are excellent poems and songs, Wengzhou Daily will also adopt them. In addition, Wengzhou Daily will also report some stories about women, no matter good or bad, as long as they have a warning and inspiration, they can be published. Mu Yangling spoke in detail, and everyone listened carefully. Although the Times has been around for several years, this is the first time that people have come into contact with the operation of the newspaper. They really don't know much about these things, so they have many questions to ask. For example, if we go to work in a newspaper, don't we run around in public? Mu Yangling explained, editors are only used to review manuscripts in the newspaper. As for news manuscripts, it is good if you are willing to verify them yourself. If you don't want the library, there are people who can be driven by you. At the beginning of the establishment, Mu Yangling was willing to relax the requirements to a great extent. But we still need a housekeeper. We can't stay in the newspaper all day long. Everyone can rest assured that the working hours of the newspaper are 3 hours a day, and 2 days off every 5 days. I think this is not difficult for you. It's really not difficult, just squint for 3 hours, drink afternoon tea, and enjoy the flowers. These are the common questions of most people, and the rest are more scattered. For example, a little girl asked embarrassingly, "My lady, have you read the poems I sent you? Do you think it can be published?" A little daughter-in-law asked, "Madam, I also wrote an article for you, what do you think? If there are any shortcomings, you can point it out and I will take it back and correct it." Even Ms. Lin turned her head and said to Mu Yangling, "Knowing that my mother is going to publish the Wengzhou newspaper, I am so happy that I stayed up all night and wrote an article. I just don't know if my mother will dislike it." Mu Yangling's smiling face was about to freeze, she could only raise her voice slightly and said, "I have a specialization in art, I am good at travel notes and history books, and the rest may not be able to be your judges. You must know your own whether the article can pass the test depends on hiring enough editors and preparing the Wengzhou newspaper." Everyone feels sorry, and can only suppress the urgency in their hearts and continue to wait. During the lunch break, Mu Yangling specially invited Ms. Hua to speak. Seeing this, several people were thoughtful, and said in a low voice, "Mr. Liu has a reputation for talent in the boudoir. I'm afraid the princess will value her as the deputy head. But I don't think she can compare to Ms. Lin. Madame Lin may not be willing to stand out." That's not necessarily the case. Hasn't Mr. Lin also set his sights on the position of the owner of the Times recently? Ms. Lin may be tempted by Ms. Lin, even Ms. Lin has stepped forward. Ms. Lin was also talking to her daughter-in-law, "Your ability is not weaker than Ms. Liu's. I'm afraid the princess will look for you next. Have you thought about it?" Ms. Lin took a sip of tea, pursed her lips and smiled, "Mother, the Empress is the owner of the pavilion. So even if she is only invited to be an editor, it is not ashamed. Of course, She pays attention to everything from the heart, and doesn't pay much attention to it. There were quite a few people who had the same idea as Mrs. Lin, and everyone looked in the direction where Mrs. Hua left, feeling agitated. And Mrs. Hua's heart is not calm now. She pulled the handkerchief in her hand, and entered the room with a smile. In addition to Mu Yangling, there was Xiao Xia's in the room. Just as Mrs. Hua was about to salute, Xiao Xia grabbed her hand and said with a smile, "You are still so polite in front of me, come here quickly, don't look at Aling's serious face, in fact, she is the same as me." The Xioxia family and the Lu family have a very good relationship, so they speak casually. Mrs. Hua looked at Princess Rong generously, seeing that she was standing with a smile on her face, she smiled and saluted again, "Although the princess is kind, you still have to do what you should." Mu Yangling saw her bright and cheerful, and felt good in his heart, and said with a smile, "This is private, so there is no need to be so polite, please sit down." The Xioxia family pulled Mrs. Hua to sit beside her, and Mu Yangling said, "I invited Mrs. Hua to discuss important matters. I originally wanted to follow Liu Bei's care of the thatched cottage, but my cousin said that you, like me, don't love these things. It's just that I invited you over immediately. If it's successful or not, you can give me an accurate statement so that I can make the next arrangement." Mrs. Hua got up and saluted, "My concubine has an assignment, as long as I can do it, I will dare not refuse." "I don't like to be difficult for others," Mu Yangling said, pretending to be serious. "Actually, it's not a big deal, but Wengzhou News still lacks a deputy curator. I don't know if Mrs. Hua is willing to come out to help me." Although she had already expected it in her heart, Madame Hua couldn't help but feel agitated when she heard Mu Yangling's words. Crouching tiger, hidden dragon in Beijing, she really didn't expect Mu Yangling to invite her. She peeked at Xiao Xia, suspecting that she had recommended herself to Mu Yangling. Xiao Xia nodded and smiled at her, and said, "Don't look at me, although I said something in front of her, it is her own choice whether to use it or not." You are listening to Novels at Bless Up channel. Wish you happiness and luck. Please subscribe to receive new novels. How do you feel about this novel? Please like and leave a comment. The Reborn Wife is Farming. Author, Yu Yuzu. Chapter 1181. Mu Yangling looked into Mrs. Shanghua's eyes and said with a smile, "I chose you because I think you are the most suitable." The candidates proposed by Mrs. Xiao Xia all have advantages and disadvantages. Based on talent and character, the most suitable ones are Mrs. Hua and Mrs. Lin. The reason why Mu Yangling gave up on Mrs. Lin was because she had made up her mind that Lin Wide would take over as the head of the Times, and the second was because of Mrs. Hua's social circle. Although Mrs. Lin is not bad, but under the influence of Lin Wide, her social circle is very narrow, and Mrs. Hua's father-in-law, Hua Hui, is a loyal and brave uncle. Both civil and military are occupied, and the wives on both sides have friendship, and the relationship is not bad. Mu Yangling didn't want the North Korea, Chinese and military to compete with each other before the Wengzhou newspaper was opened, so Mrs. Hua was undoubtedly the best candidate. Lu and Mu Yangling were the same age, and they were in their prime. Hearing this, his eyes shone brightly, and he said confidently, "Since your mother trusts me, why not take over this newspaper? A man who is a confidant dies, Jingshu is willing to be the concubine's confidant." With that said, Mrs. Lu respectfully bowed down. Mu Yangling was startled, and hurriedly came down to support her. With a light in his eyes, he laughed loudly and said, "Okay, since you are my confidant, I will naturally be your confidant too." Xiao Xia looked at the two of them back and forth, inexplicably feeling sore in her heart. Obviously she is Aling's best friend, isn't she? "Niang Niang, my boudoir name is Jingshu, you will call me Jingshu from now on." "Then don't call me your mother, call me Aling. My girlfriend is Yangling, and everyone loves to call me Aling." Mrs. Lu murmured, Wang Sen Yang 11 GPU, Hong De Zhang 11 Yang Ling, it is rare for a woman to choose such a magnificent name. The person who named your empress has great expectations for you. Mu Yangling smiled, and said heartily, my mother picked it up, but she hoped that I would go forward bravely after encountering difficulties and sail forward like wind and waves. My father thought the name sounded good, so he decided on it. Seeing that they chatted more and more speculatively, Xiao Xia immediately pouted, stepped forward and hugged Mu Yangling's arm, and said, Aling, the guests in front are still waiting, why don't you send everyone away first, and we will talk later. Lu said apologetically, I forgot that you were still entertaining guests, so I'll go back and we'll discuss the newspaper when we're free. Mu Yangling nodded, and personally sent the person to the door. Seeing that the person had gone far away, he turned around and grabbed Xiao Xia's shoulder and smiled, are you jealous? Xiao Xia pouted, you're all going to die for each other, what kind of jealousy am I eating? If you want to eat, it's fourth uncle. Mu Yangling laughed loudly, and after laughing for a long time, he said seriously, Lu Jingshu is really good, she is very good at arousing people's emotions, talking to her, my heart was surging for a long time. Xiao Xia was taken aback for a moment, and said, the words she said should be from the heart. Mu Yangling smiled and said, I also come from the heart. If she is really my confidant, I will naturally be her confidant, and you are still more than a confidant. You are a girlfriend, okay. Xiao Xia blushed slightly, and pinched her arm angrily, I don't want to eat yours, but my father's if I want to be jealous. What nonsense are you talking about? Mu Yangling jumped away with a smile, and said, there is nothing undeniable about this. When I was young, I was jealous because my younger brother liked my mother more. Later, I specially set aside 2 days to play with him. I must tell him I just give up if I like my sister the most. Jealousy doesn't just exist between men and women. Xiao Xia's face turned even redder when she was said to be the center of the matter, and she started to scratch her, but Mu Yangling begged for mercy before giving up. Li Shun heard that there was no more noise inside, so he came in with some refreshments. Sitting cross-legged on the couch, Xiao Xia asked, Mrs. Hua has settled here, where is Mrs. Lin? I decided to ask her to be the editor-in-chief. In terms of talent, I'm afraid no one in the capital can compare to her. It would be best if she is willing to come out of the mountain. If she doesn't, I can only find someone else. Mu Yangling smiled at Xiao Xia and said, I want to invite you to be the deputy editor-in-chief, and I will take over as the deputy curator in the future. Xiao Xia was startled and asked, whose hand will I take? Mu Yangling blinked, of course it's mine. It's not like you don't know that I'm a lazy person, and working in a newspaper is not my hobby. Compared with sitting in the room reviewing manuscripts and handling affairs, I prefer riding horses, archery, taking a few children to play, even going shopping is better than sitting in the house. I will definitely resign when the Wengzhou newspaper hits the track, and you will take over when the time comes. Xiao Xia was silent, she somewhat understood why Aling was always pestering her to help with the Wengzhou newspaper. Her eye circles were a little red, and she asked, is it because of me? Seeing her like this, Mu Yangling waved his hands in panic and said, of course not, where did you think, if I really love to be the deputy curator, let alone you, even Chi Heiran would not let me if he wanted to. Since I Wuxin, you are interested, why not leave it to you? Xiao Xia pressed the corners of her eyes, lowered her head and said softly, thank you. Mu Yangling took her hand but was very happy. Xiao Xia has always been devoted to the inner house, and now she is finally interested in one thing, and Mu Yangling is naturally willing to help her. Apart from family, a woman should have other focus, otherwise she will put all her heart and soul into family affairs, and she will be easily irritable and collapsed. Xiao Xia's heart was both moved and panicked, for fear that she might not do well and let Mu Yangling down. After all, she is still a little timid and inferior. She has only dealt with family affairs these years. If Mu Yangling hadn't left Prince Rong's mansion to her the year before, she would have managed 2 families by herself. I'm afraid she didn't have the confidence this time. Tell Mu Yangling that he wants to work in the newspaper office. Mu Yangling felt her hands trembling, so he leaned into her ear and said, "Don't be afraid, I will take you with me, and I will let you go after you get familiar with it, and you and Mrs. Hua are very close, aren't you? She will help you too." Xiao Xia nodded slowly. Seeing that she hadn't returned to her mind, Mu Yangling asked her to rest in the room and went out to entertain guests by herself. Afterwards, Mu Yangling met with several target persons. Mrs. Lin agreed to be the editor-in-chief after only thinking about it for a while the others mostly expressed that they would think about it for a day or two. Such a big matter needs to be discussed with the family. Not everyone has Lu Jingshi's decision and Mrs. Lin's confidence. Mrs. Lin has long been the master of the family in the Lin family. She is also a grandmother herself, and her mother-in-law doesn't care about things, and her husband is open-minded, so she can make her own decisions. Others do not have this condition. Mu Yangling also promised to wait for them for 3 days. After everyone left Prince Rong's mansion, they didn't go back to their own homes, but a few close friends got together and continued to discuss. Mu Yangling and Mrs. Hua and Mrs. Lin nodded slightly before turning back. Xiao Xia helped Mu Yangling direct people to pack up the things before going home. Fan Zijin was not greeted when he returned home for the first time. He was slightly uncomfortable and asked, "Where is your princess?" The servant lowered his head and said in a low voice, "Your Majesty is in the study." Fan Zijin frowned slightly, walked towards the dining room, paused, turned around and went to the small study after thinking about it. Xiao Xia will be in the study at this point in time. Don't let something happen, right? The reborn wife is farming. Author, Yu Yuzu. Chapter 1182. Xiao Xia was very excited all day long, and it was only after she got home that she remembered that she hadn't mentioned this to Fan Zijin yet. With her husband's personality, it was really difficult to get him to agree to this. Xiao Xia suddenly became anxious, thinking of countermeasures in the study, and naturally forgot the time when Fan Zijin came back. Suddenly seeing Fan Zijin appearing in the study, Xiao Xia was still a little panicked and stood up helplessly. Fan Zijin frowned even tighter, and asked, "What happened?" Xiao Xia shook her head again and again, "No, nothing happened." "It's nothing wrong, why are you in such a panic?" Fan Zijin pulled a chair and sat down, frowned and looked at his wife who was standing at a loss in front of the desk. He rubbed his forehead and asked, "Tell me, what's the matter? Do you want me to ask the maid who is next to you?" If the husband asks, they will definitely not be able to hide it. Xiao Xia's lips trembled, she took a careful look at Fan Zijin's face, and said in a low voice, I want to be the deputy editor-in-chief of Wengzhou News." Fan Zijin shook his head, rubbed his ears and asked, "What did you just say? I didn't hear clearly, please say it again." Xiao Xia, who was already timid, lowered her voice, and said in a low voice almost like a mosquito, "I want to work in Wengzhou News." Fan Zijin's complexion changed a few times, and he asked, "Is this Mu Yangling's bad idea again? Whose woman do you see running out to work? Is it because you need clothes or food? The Empress has agreed to be the owner of the Wengzhou newspaper, and Aling is still serving as the deputy owner." Fan Zijin snorted softly. Although he was not worried, his complexion improved a lot. He tapped on his knee and asked, "Is she busy with Wengzhou News these days?" Xiao Xia nodded hesitantly. "There are also matters raised by the Times and other newspapers, and the stewards have come to ask questions." "Humph, the issue of adding the Times and selecting the owner of the library has been going on for so many days. I haven't made up my mind until now, so it shows how disinterested she is. Fan Zijan glanced at his wife, seeing her lowering her head and timidly looking at him, she suddenly became short of breath. Did he hit her or scold her? Is there any need to be so afraid of him? Maybe going out and seeing the world won't be so timid. Mu Yangling has been around outside since he was a child, so he is very courageous. Thinking about it this way, Fan Zijan immediately had no objection to Xiao Xia's appointment to Wengzhou News, and asked, "What position did Aling give you?" Deputy Editor-in-Chief. Xiao Xia carefully glanced at her husband's face, and said, Aling said that she will promote me to be the Deputy Editor-in-Chief once the operation of Wengzhou News is stabilized. Take her job. Xiao Xia nodded. Fan Zijan was thoughtful. Then what is she going to do after leaving Wengzhou Bao? Aling said that she can't sit still, so she likes to ride horses and shoot arrows. Even shopping is better than sitting in a newspaper office. Fan Zijan snorted softly, not showing it on the surface, but she didn't believe it in her heart. She had been a princess for so many years, but she mostly sat down. Although Fan Zijan's intuition was wrong, he couldn't find any reason, so he could only put aside his doubts, stood up and said, "Forget it, if you want to go, then go, but you have to take care of the family affairs." Xiao Xia nodded again and again. "Don't worry, it will only take 3 hours to go to the newspaper office. If not, I can still ask for leave, and I will only go for half a day." Fan Zijan stared slightly. 3 hours? The people reporting the report are 5 hours a day. Even those who are officials work 5 hours a day. Xiao Xia said with a smile. Aling said it was because we women have great responsibilities, and the family can't do without us. This shortened the time. She said she believed in our efficiency. Fan Zijan snorted softly. This is buying people's hearts. Then Aling also succeeded, and many people were moved at that time. Fan Zijan knew at a glance that Xiao Xia was also one of those who were moved. He and Mu Yangling had never dealt with each other, so he got up and said, "Let's go, let's eat." Fan Zijan entered the palace early the next morning and planned to dig a hole for Mu Yangling, but Chi Heiran excitedly came to him before he dug, put his shoulder on his shoulder and asked in a low voice, "Zijan, what do you say to the Times, interested?" Fan Zijan raised his eyebrows. Chi Heiran said, "I just remembered that the Times is a good place to improve your reputation. Do you want to work part-time there or something?" Fan Zijan asked, "Can you be the owner of the Times?" Chi Heiran raised his head and raised his chest and said, "The Times belongs to Aling, and Aling listens to me. Do you think I can be the owner of the Times? Although the Secretary of the Ministry of Household Affairs is old and will return to his hometown in a few years, but you want it takes a long time to go from Hubei Shangshu to the position of Prime Minister step by step, and there is no harm in improving your reputation." Fan Zijan snorted twice, non-committal to the first half of his sentence, but for the second half, Fan Zijan thought about it, and finally shook his head. "I'm busy enough, so I won't go to the Times to join in the fun. There are many ways to improve my reputation, no one more." Seeing his good brother thinking about him like this, Fan Zijan felt a little embarrassed when he thought of his own thoughts. "I see that Aling doesn't seem to pay much attention to the Times. In terms of importance, the Times is far above the Wengzhou News, so I still miss her. If the ability is insufficient, it is best to hand it over to the Emperor as soon as possible. It is better for the imperial court to take over than her to keep it in stock." Chi Heiran immediately shook his head. Aling said that the newspaper cannot be handed over to the imperial court alone. He looked left and right, and said in a low voice, "The newspaper was originally set up to report the injustices of the officialdom and the people. Court. However, the ability of newspapers to control public opinion is getting stronger and stronger, so they cannot be completely handed over to the people, lest they be used by those who want to." Seeing that he couldn't get to the point after talking for a long time, Fan Zijan asked, So Aling told us to find a way to solve it ourselves." Fan Zijian's expression twisted, and he asked, "Is there nothing she can do?" Chi Heiran shook his head. She said she only has one head, and she only wants to find out the questions, but can't find the answers, so let's brainstorm. Fan Zijian snorted. If you don't believe that Mu Yangling has nothing to do, it's probably because the method she came up with has a lot of loopholes, so she doesn't want to take it out. He dropped the matter and asked, "Then the owner of the Times should be decided, right?" "It's settled, it's Lin Wide, and Aling is planning to go to Songshan Academy to meet him today." Fan Zijian was thoughtful. Compared with the people in the court, she is more inclined to the folk. Mu Yangling has always loved Xiaobao. It is said that this restaurant is mainly handed over to Teifu Fang, which can not only improve the reputation of the prince and Teifu, but also consolidate the status of the prince. Lin White is an official. Fan Zijian had a faint idea in his heart. Although he really wanted them to control the Times, Mu Yangling's worries were justified. The prosperity of their era only belonged to their era, and they must not leave a mess for future generations. Knowing what the court will look like in the future, everything cannot be in the hands of court officials or the royal family. What is better for the future development of Daki is the best now. It is best for the newspaper to be in the hands of the three parties, but should be mainly operated by the people, and the court and the royal family should jointly supervise it. In this way, it is contrary to the existing custom, because now the court and the royal family do things, and the people supervise.